Good morning. It's good to be with you as we finish up our week together in Acts. We're getting closer to being done. Acts has 28 chapters, so we're not too much further. We'll be done with Acts in the coming weeks. So we're going to finish up chapter 22 and move into chapter 23 today. So we're going to be reading starting with Acts 22 verse 30, reading into chapter 23 verse 11. So starting with Acts chapter 22, verse 30. Since he wanted to find out what Paul was being accused of by the Jews, the next day he released him and ordered the chief priest and the entire council to meet. He brought Paul down and had him stand before them. When Paul was looking intently at the council, he said, "Brothers, up to this day I have lived my life with a clear conscience before God." Then the high priest Ananias ordered those standing near him to strike him on the mouth. At this, Paul said to him, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. Are you sitting there to judge me according to the law? In a violation of the law, you order me to be struck?" Those standing nearby said, "Do you dare insult God's high priest?" And Paul said, "I did not realize, brothers, that he was the high priest, for it's written, 'You shall not speak evil of a leader of your people.'" When Paul noticed some were Sadducees and the others were Pharisees, he called out to the council, "Brothers, I am a Pharisee, son of the Pharisees. I am on trial concerning the hope of the resurrection of the dead." When he said this, a dissension began between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The assembly was divided. The Sadducees say there is no resurrection, or angels, or spirits, but the Pharisees acknowledge all three. Then a great clamor arose. Certain scribes of the Pharisees group stood up and contended, "We find nothing wrong with this man. What if a spirit or an angel had spoken to him?" When the dissension became violent, the tribune, fearing that they would tear Paul to pieces, ordered the soldiers to go down, take him by force, and bring him into the barracks. That night the Lord stood near him and said, "Keep up your courage, for just as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so must you bear witness also in Rome." Okay, so Paul now, yesterday we saw him being with the Roman soldiers, and he was about to get beat, and he said, "Is it legal to be a Roman citizen?" And they said, "Oh no, can't do that." So now the tribune, he is trying to figure out exactly what they're mad at Paul about. So he has Paul sent to the Jewish leaders to say, "Okay, let me sit back and watch what these folk are doing. Let's see if I can figure out what's happening." So the tribune has him sit down, and Paul, I said, "Paul's smart, man. Don't ever think Paul's a dummy." Paul had to know who the high priest was. God, come on, he's a high priest. That's a big deal. He's going to have fancy robes. Everybody's going to know the high priest. He's a big deal. So Paul says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were the high priest." After he gets smacked in the mouth, and then Paul's quoting the he's showing them he knows the law. Says, "Oh, I would never speak of the high priest because the law says this." So he's showing his expertise in the law, and then he picks up that the council, the Sanhedrin, there's a division between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And I said yesterday I'd give you a little bit of history on this. I want to explain who the Pharisees and the Sadducees were. Pharisee, okay. The analogy I give in our modern American context is your Sadducees were your big town, big steeple preachers, and that's your Sadducees. Your Pharisees were the country, rural preachers. Sadducees were the chief priests, the religious leaders. They were the ones who kept the temple system going. The Sadducees were the ones that were involved in the temple worship primarily. That was them. They were the chief priests. The Pharisees. That's so Sadducees, temple. Sadducees, worship. The Pharisees were the rabbis. They were in the synagogues. So Sadducees, temple. Pharisees, synagogue. Sadducees focused on the sacrificial system. They were the ones that did the sacrifices. Pharisees were focused on the law. They're the ones that taught in the synagogues. They were the ones that taught the law. So when you hear the phrase in the Bible, teachers of the law, that's typically a Pharisee. So Pharisees were always tied to the temple. Sadducees were always tied to the temple. Pharisees were always tied to the synagogue. Sadducees, sacrificial system. Pharisees, legal, law, teaching. Okay. So because of that, they looked at things differently. So the Sadducees, because they were focused primarily on the sacrificial system, they focused almost exclusively on the books of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's what they focused on. So some of the things, and so there are not the same explicit references to resurrection and things like that there are in other books of the Bible. So the Pharisees looked at the whole of the Old Testament. So they regarded the books of Moses with some special reverence, much like we regard the Gospels. But the Pharisees also viewed the Psalms as inspired. They viewed the prophets as inspired. They viewed all of the Old Testament as inspired. So the Sadducees really only focused on the books of Moses. So they had different points of emphasis and different things that they focused on and that they didn't focus on, like resurrection. And the Pharisees focused on all the Old Testament. So they had different points of emphasis. So within that, Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection. They didn't. They didn't believe the resurrection. So because of that, that's why many of the Bible always makes a big deal about when a priest, because you see this earlier in Acts. Do you notice how many times it would say, and many priests came to believe? That's a big honking deal, because the Sadducees would not have believed in resurrection. The Pharisees did. So they believed a resurrection was possible. They believed that a resurrection could happen. They believed it. The Sadducees didn't. So it was such a huge leap for a Sadducee to believe that Jesus was the Messiah, because the Sadducees didn't even believe in resurrection. That's why it's always, you will see, anytime a priest becomes a believer in Jesus, it's a big deal in Acts, huge deal, because that was such a huge intellectual leap for them to make, to go from not believing the resurrection to believing that Jesus Christ was the resurrection. So we see Paul, once again, like yesterday, Paul kind of playing with the Roman citizenship thing. We see Paul saying, "Oh, guys, they're only mad at me because I'm a Pharisee. Like that's why they're mad at me, because I'm a Pharisee, son of a Pharisee. This is all about that. This is all our internal divisions." So what does that do? That makes the Pharisee say, wait, he's one of us? He's one of our guys? He's a Pharisee? Well, then no, he's good. What if an angel had spoken to him? It says, what if a spirit or an angel had spoken to him? So we see Paul kind of play up their divisions. Paul kind of, once again, Paul's smart, y'all. When you read Acts, you're going to see Paul's smart. But where this whole thing is going is where we see in verse 11. That night the Lord stood near him and said, "Keep up your courage. For just as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so must you also bear witness in Rome." All these things are necessary to happen to get Paul to Rome. That's where this whole train is headed towards. Paul is going to Rome. Paul is going to stand before Caesar. Paul's going to stand before the Roman officials. Paul's going to stand before the Roman guards. Paul will stand before Rome. He will be in the capital of the empire, and he will proclaim the resurrection of Jesus Christ to these individuals. That's where this is going. So we see Paul knowing his stuff today, y'all. And Paul knows his stuff. And that's why it's important for us, y'all, to know the Bible, to know our stuff, to know our beliefs, to know our doctrine, to know what we believe, because we need it. I think of something a bishop told us once, to always have certain parts of our church life memorized, because there might come a time when you need it, you don't have your stuff with you, so you need to know it. That's why you need to memorize the Bible. I know some of us are better at memorization than others, but memorizing the Bible is an important discipline. Knowing what we believe is an important discipline. These are important things. Paul knew what he believed, and also he knew what they believed. So he was able to kind of get them fired up a little bit, kind of stirred up a little bit with them. And that controversy that he started here really pushed him down the road towards where he was going. And I love the words Lord to him in 11. Keep up your courage. Be strong. Be brave. One of the major commands of the Bible, y'all. Be strong. Be brave. Over and over and over again, we're told to be strong. Be strong. Be strong. Have courage. Be strong. So today, whatever you're facing, be strong. Have courage. So let's know our beliefs. Let's know what we believe. Let's stand upon Jesus. Let's internalize Jesus. Let's internalize his truth. And let's always be faithful. So God was taking Paul to a certain place. And It was going to be for God's glory. He's doing the same thing with us today, y'all. So that's a little bit. I hope that background helps you better understand the Sadducees and the Pharisees. It's an important thing for us to know about. So, thanks for being with us. Hope you have a great weekend. Worship, if you're in the Madison area, we'd love to worship with you Sunday here at St. Matthew's United Methodist Church. Hope that you can be with us. Thanks for being with us. Have a great day.